She was rejected by her billionaire CEO husband at the hospital for giving birth to a girl. Years later, the rejected daughter saves his life. It's a girl, the doctor announced, holding up the perfectly formed infant. A beautiful, healthy baby girl. Alexander Sterling's face went white. He stared at the pink blanket as if it represented the end of all his dreams. A girl? This changes everything, Rebecca. Everything. His wife, Rebecca, looked up from the hospital bed in disbelief. What do you mean? She's our baby. She's healthy and perfect. Sterling Medical Technologies needs a strong male leader, Rebecca. The board respects patriarchal leadership. A daughter can't command that authority. I built a cardiac device empire to pass to a son who could lead with strength. What use is a girl in convincing surgeons to trust our technology? Rebecca stared at her husband in shock. Alexander, she's 5 minutes old. She's our daughter. Alexander moved toward the door, his voice cold and calculating. This child was supposed to be my legacy. Instead, she's just an obstacle. Find your own way home, Rebecca. Both of you. This child serves no purpose in my plans. The baby made a soft sound, her tiny fingers wrapping around Rebecca's thumb. As Alexander's footsteps echoed down the hallway, Rebecca whispered, "Your daddy doesn't want us, baby girl. But you're going to prove him devastatingly wrong." 27 years later, that same baby girl would become Dr. Grace Martinez, head of cardiac surgery at Chicago General Hospital. And on a Tuesday afternoon, when billionaire Alexander Sterling collapsed from a massive heart attack, his panicked assistant would call Chicago General demanding their best cardiac surgeon. What they didn't know was that their best surgeon was the daughter Alexander had abandoned for not being the son he wanted. In 4 hours, Grace would face an impossible choice. Save the father who called her worthless, or let the man who created life-saving heart devices die from his own broken heart. This is the story of ultimate irony, where a father's cruelest rejection would lead to his life, depending entirely on the daughter he threw away. 27 years ago, St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos of the maternity ward. In room 314, Rebecca had been in labor for 20 hours. The contractions came in waves, each one bringing her closer to meeting the child she and her husband had planned for and dreamed about. Outside in the hallway, Alexander Sterling paced like a caged animal. At 38, he was already making his mark in the medical device industry. Sterling Medical Technologies was growing rapidly, and he had big plans. Plans that required the right kind of heir. "Mr. Sterling," the nurse called from the doorway. "Your wife is ready to push. Would you like to be present for the birth?" Alexander straightened his tie and walked toward the room, his mind already racing ahead to board meetings and succession plans. Of course, this is the moment I've been waiting for. My son and future CEO. He had already rehearsed his announcement to the Sterling Medical Board. His son would represent strength, leadership, the kind of authoritative presence that would command respect from surgeons and hospital administrators who purchased their cardiac devices. In Alexander's mind, the medical device industry was a man's world, and he needed a male heir to navigate it successfully. Inside the room, Rebecca gripped the bed rails as another contraction hit. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her expression showed determination and anticipation. "Alexander, I can see the head. Our baby is almost here. Push, Rebecca. Push hard. Bring my son into the world." The next few minutes passed in a blur of medical instructions, Rebecca's determined cries, and then, finally, the sound that changed everything. The sharp, strong cry of a newborn baby. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up the perfectly formed infant. A beautiful, healthy baby girl. Alexander's face went white. His hands dropped to his sides as if someone had just delivered devastating news. "A girl? Are you absolutely certain?" "Very certain, Mr. Sterling. Congratulations, you have a daughter." The nurse wrapped the baby in a soft pink blanket and moved toward Rebecca. The infant's eyes opened, revealing the same determined expression that Rebecca wore, the same strong jawline that marked Alexander's family. Her cry was strong and clear, announcing her presence to the world. "She's perfect, Alexander. Look at her." Rebecca's voice filled with wonder as the nurse placed the baby in her arms. "She has your eyes, your chin. She's absolutely perfect." But Alexander wasn't looking at his daughter. He was staring at the pink blanket as if it represented the collapse of everything he had worked toward. His face hardened, the joy he had expected to feel replaced by cold disappointment. This changes everything, Rebecca. Everything I've planned, everything I've worked for. Rebecca looked up from her daughter, confusion replacing the euphoria of new motherhood. What do you mean? She's our baby. She's healthy and perfect. Look at her, Alexander. Alexander began pacing the small room, his mind calculating all the ways this outcome disrupted his carefully constructed vision. Sterling Medical Technologies needs a strong male leader, Rebecca. The board respects patriarchal leadership. Our biggest clients are senior surgeons, mostly men in their 50s and 60s. They expect to deal with another man, someone who commands authority. Alexander, she's 5 minutes old. How can you be talking about business right now? Because business is what matters. Because this changes my entire succession plan. His voice grew colder with each word. I built a cardiac device empire to pass to a son who could lead with strength and conviction. What use is a girl in convincing cardiac surgeons to trust our technology? How can she command respect in boardrooms full of men who expect masculine leadership? The baby made a soft cooing sound, her tiny fingers moving against the pink blanket. Rebecca looked down at her daughter's face, seeing intelligence and strength even in those first moments of life. Alexander, listen to yourself. She's your daughter, your flesh and blood. She could be anything. She could be a doctor, an engineer, a business leader. She could be better than any son. Alexander stopped pacing and turned to face his wife and daughter. Instead of softening at the sight of them together, his expression grew harder. Impossible, Rebecca. The medical device industry is built on relationships, trust, masculine authority. Cardiac surgeons need to believe in the strength of the person behind the technology. They won't take direction from a woman. They won't respect female leadership in this field. The nurse, who had been quietly monitoring Rebecca's recovery, stopped what she was doing. In 30 years of delivery room experience, she had never heard a father speak about his newborn child this way. She exchanged a concerned glance with the doctor. So what are you saying, Alexander? Rebecca's voice carried a note of warning, as if she was beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. Alexander moved closer to the bed, looking down at the baby for the first time since her birth. The infant's eyes were open, fixed on his face with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so young. Instead of melting his heart, her gaze seemed to harden his resolve. I'm saying this child ruins everything I've worked for, Rebecca. I built Sterling Medical Technologies to create a dynasty, to pass something meaningful to a son who could carry on the legacy with strength and authority. What am I supposed to do with a daughter who will never be able to command the respect of cardiac surgeons or lead a medical device company effectively? Rebecca's shock was transforming into something deeper, darker. You're supposed to love her, Alexander. You're supposed to be her father. I'm supposed to be practical. Alexander straightened his jacket, his businessman's mask sliding back into place. I have investors to answer to, a board to satisfy, and clients who expect certain things from Sterling Medical Technologies. This child doesn't fit into any of those expectations. The baby chose that moment to make another soft sound, almost as if she was trying to get her father's attention. Rebecca looked down at her daughter, then back at Alexander. She's trying to reach you, Alexander. Your daughter is trying to connect with you. My daughter, Alexander said the words as if they tasted bitter, is a complication I didn't plan for and can't afford. He headed toward the door, his decision apparently made. Rebecca called after him, desperation creeping into her voice. Alexander, wait. Please. Just hold her once. Look at her properly. She's part of you. Alexander paused at the threshold, his hand on the door handle. For a moment, the nurse thought he might turn around, might reconsider the devastating words he had spoken. Instead, he looked back over his shoulder with cold finality. Find your own way home, Rebecca. Both of you. This child serves no purpose in my plans, and I won't pretend otherwise. I have a company to run and a future to secure. A future that no longer includes either of you. And don't expect any support from me. You made your bed by giving me a useless daughter instead of the son I needed. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor, each step taking him further away from the family he was choosing to abandon. Rebecca's tears fell onto the pink blanket as the reality of what had just happened settled over the room. The nurse approached the bed, her expression a mixture of professional composure and personal outrage. Mrs. Sterling, I'm so sorry. I've delivered over 3,000 babies in my career, and I've never witnessed anything like that. Rebecca looked down at her daughter, who was sleeping peacefully despite the emotional chaos that had just unfolded around her. His loss, she whispered, her voice gaining strength even as tears continued to fall. Your daddy doesn't want us, baby girl, but that doesn't mean we're not wanted. That doesn't mean we're not valuable. The nurse leaned closer, her voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Sterling, I've seen many babies in my time here. This one has something special. I can see it in her eyes, in the way she holds herself. She has fight in her. She's going to be something extraordinary. Rebecca touched her daughter's tiny hand, and immediately the baby's fingers curled around her mother's thumb. The grip was surprisingly strong for someone so small. Alexander thinks you're worthless because you're not the son he wanted. But you know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who's going to prove him devastatingly wrong. As if responding to her mother's words, the baby opened her eyes again, fixing them on Rebecca's face with that same intense gaze that had unsettled Alexander. But where Alexander had seen disruption to his plans, Rebecca saw determination and intelligence. Your daddy makes machines that help fix hearts, Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. But you, my sweet girl, you're going to learn to fix hearts with your own hands. You're going to save lives with skill and compassion. And that's going to be infinitely more powerful than anything he ever creates in his factories. The doctor, who had been filling out paperwork, looked up. Have you chosen a name for her? Rebecca looked at her daughter's determined expression, at the strength already evident in her tiny features, at the way she seemed to be listening to every word. Grace, she said without hesitation. Her name is Grace Martinez. She's going to keep my name, and she's going to earn everything herself. She's going to show the world that worth isn't determined by what someone else wants you to be, but by what you choose to become. The nurse smiled, the first genuine smile in the room since the delivery. Grace Martinez. That's a strong name for a strong girl. Meanwhile, in the hospital parking lot, Alexander sat in his luxury sedan, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. For just a moment, doubt crept in. The image of his daughter's face, so much like his own, flickered through his mind. The way she had looked at him with those alert, intelligent eyes. But then he thought about Monday morning's board meeting, about the expansion into European markets that required strong leadership, about the surgical partners who expected to deal with authoritative male executives. A daughter simply didn't fit into that world. She would be a liability, not an asset. He started the engine and drove towards Sterling Medical Technologies headquarters, toward a future that he had just decided would not include the family he was leaving behind. In his mind, he had made the practical choice, the business-smart decision that would preserve everything he had built. He had no idea that he had just thrown away the most precious thing he would ever create. And he had no idea that 27 years later, that same daughter would hold his life in her capable hands and face the ultimate choice about whether he deserved the salvation she could provide. If you've ever been underestimated or told you're not enough, this story will prove them devastatingly wrong. Grace's journey from rejected newborn to life-saving surgeon is about to inspire you. Rebecca stepped out of St. Mary's Hospital carrying her 3-day-old daughter, with no husband waiting, no car in the parking lot, and exactly $47 in her purse. The taxi ride to her mother's small apartment cost $18. As Chicago's winter wind cut through her thin coat, Rebecca made a promise that would shape both their lives forever. We don't need him, Grace. We're going to build something better. Rebecca's mother, Elena, opened the door to find her daughter holding a pink bundle, tears streaming down her face. Mija, where is Alexander? Gone. He said Grace serves no purpose because she's not the son he wanted. Elena's weathered hands reached for the baby. Then he's a fool. This little one has purpose written all over her face. Look at those eyes, Rebecca. She's already planning something. The next morning, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table with a newspaper and a pen, circling job listings. Grace slept in a makeshift crib Elena had created from a dresser drawer lined with soft towels. I need 3 jobs, Mama. 1 won't be enough. 3 jobs means you'll never see your baby. Rebecca looked at Grace's peaceful face. I'll see her, and she'll see me working. She'll understand that worth comes from effort, not from someone else's approval. Within 2 weeks, Rebecca had secured her triple employment. Morning shift at the hospital cafeteria. Afternoon cleaning offices downtown. Evening shift at a diner near Northwestern University. 18 hours a day, 6 days a week. Elena watched Grace during the day, and on Sundays, Rebecca devoted every moment to her daughter. The apartment was small, the furniture secondhand, the budget impossibly tight. But Grace thrived. By 6 months, she was sitting up, reaching for everything, studying faces with intense curiosity. By her first birthday, she was walking and had learned to wave goodbye to Rebecca each morning and clap when she returned each night. "Look at her, Elena," Rebecca said one Sunday as Grace stacked blocks with methodical precision. "She doesn't just play, she analyzes. She figures out how things work. She gets that from you, Mija. The determination to understand everything." When Grace turned 5, Rebecca enrolled her in kindergarten at Lincoln Elementary. The teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called after the first week. "Mrs. Rebecca, Grace is reading at a 3rd grade level. She's been helping other children with their letters. Has she been in preschool?" "No, just with her grandmother and me. I read to her every night." "What do you read?" Rebecca paused, slightly embarrassed. "Whatever I can find at the library. Sometimes medical journals from my cafeteria job." She likes the pictures of hearts and lungs. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Martinez, Grace is exceptional. We need to make sure she's challenged appropriately." That evening, Rebecca sat Grace on her lap in their tiny living room. "Your teacher says you're very smart, baby girl." Grace looked up at her mother with those same intense eyes she'd had as a newborn. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy like the other kids?" Rebecca had been dreading this question, but she answered with characteristic honesty. "You do have a daddy, Grace. He just made a mistake. He thought little boys were more important than little girls. But he was wrong. Will he change his mind? I don't know, baby. But it doesn't matter. You're going to be so amazing that everyone will see how wrong he was. Including him." Grace nodded solemnly, as if filing this information away for future reference. "What does my daddy do?" "He makes machines that help doctors fix people's hearts." Grace's eyes lit up with interest. "How do they fix hearts?" Rebecca pulled out one of the medical journals she'd brought home. "Here, let me show you." By age 8, Grace could identify different types of heart conditions from the medical illustrations Rebecca brought home. She had memorized the names of cardiac procedures and could explain the basic function of each heart chamber. Other children played house or tag. Grace played doctor, using her dolls as patients and meticulously performing imaginary surgeries. One afternoon, while waiting for Rebecca to finish her shift at the medical center, Grace wandered into the gift shop. Behind the counter was a rack of brochures for various medical practices and services. One caught her attention immediately: Sterling Medical Technologies. The cover featured a photograph of cardiac devices, and in the corner, a small photo of the company's CEO. Grace stared at the man in the photograph. He had her chin, her nose, the same determined set to his mouth. She knew instantly who he was. "Excuse me," she said to the gift shop clerk. "Can I have this?" The clerk glanced at the brochure. "Sure, honey, but that's pretty boring reading for a little girl." Grace tucked the brochure into her backpack and waited for Rebecca's shift to end. That night, after dinner, she spread the brochure on the kitchen table. "Mama, is this my daddy?" Rebecca looked at the photograph and felt her chest tighten. "Yes, Grace. That's Alexander Sterling." Grace studied the picture intently. "It says he makes cardiac devices that save people's lives. The machines help doctors during heart surgery." "That's right. Mama, I want to be a doctor who does heart surgery." Rebecca sat down beside her daughter, recognizing the tone of absolute determination in Grace's voice. "That's a very difficult thing to become, baby. It takes many years of school and very hard work." "I don't care. I want to fix people's hearts better than his machines can. I want to save people with my own hands." Rebecca looked at her 8-year-old daughter, seeing not childish fantasy, but genuine resolve. "Why, Grace? Why heart specifically?" Grace pointed to the Sterling Medical Technologies logo. "Because he makes things that help hearts. But doctors are more important than machines. If I become the best heart doctor, I'll be better than him at saving people." That night, Rebecca called her mother. "Mama, Grace wants to become a cardiac surgeon. She's 8 years old, Mija." "I know, but you should have seen her face. She wasn't playing pretend. She was making a life plan." Elena was quiet for a moment. "That man broke her heart, before she even knew she had won. Now she wants to spend her life fixing other people's hearts. There's poetry in that, Rebecca. There's also impossibility in it. Do you know how competitive medical school is? How expensive? Do you know how determined that little girl is? She's been proving impossible things possible since the day she was born. By age 12, Grace was volunteering at a free clinic every Saturday, helping elderly patients fill out forms and fetching supplies for the volunteer doctors. Dr. Williams, who ran the clinic, pulled Rebecca aside after Grace had been volunteering for 6 months. Mrs. Martinez, your daughter has something special. Yesterday, she correctly identified the symptoms of congestive heart failure in one of our patients before I did. She's 12 years old. She reads medical journals like other kids read comic books. It's more than that. She has instincts. She connects with the patients, especially the elderly ones. They trust her immediately. Rebecca watched Grace carefully bandaging the hand of an elderly man who spoke only Spanish. Grace spoke to him gently in Spanish, explaining what she was doing, making him laugh despite his pain. She wants to be a cardiac surgeon, Rebecca told Dr. Williams. I believe she will be, and I believe she'll be extraordinary at it. That evening, Grace sat at the kitchen table working on her homework. But between math problems, she was sketching diagrams of hearts, labeling the chambers and major vessels from memory. Grace, why do you love hearts so much? Grace looked up from her drawing. Because hearts are the most important thing, Mama. Without your heart working, nothing else matters. And because, she paused, seeming to search for the right words. Because hearts can be broken in different ways. Some people break them by being mean. But doctors can fix the physical part. I want to be someone who fixes the physical part. Rebecca realized her daughter was already understanding the metaphor of their situation in ways that were both heartbreaking and inspiring. By age 16, Grace was taking college-level biology and chemistry courses at Northwestern University while finishing high school. Her grades were perfect. Her volunteer work at the clinic had expanded to teaching CPR classes to community members. She tutored younger students in science and mathematics, earning money to help Rebecca with household expenses. Mrs. Martinez, Grace's guidance counselor, called one afternoon. I need to discuss Grace's college applications. Is there a problem? The opposite. She's qualified for admission to any medical program in the country. But I'm concerned about the financial aspect. Medical school is extraordinarily expensive. Rebecca felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. How expensive? Even with scholarships, you're looking at potentially $200,000 in debt by the time she completes her residency. That night, Rebecca sat Grace down for a serious conversation. Baby, I've been doing some research about medical school costs. I know it's expensive, Mama, but I'll find a way. Grace, I want you to understand something. I'll support whatever decision you make. If you want to become a cardiac surgeon, we'll find a way to make it happen. But I need you to be certain this is what you want, not just what you think you need to prove. Grace was quiet for a long moment, staring at the Sterling Medical Technologies brochure she had kept on her desk for 8 years. Mama, do you remember when I was little and I asked if my daddy would change his mind about me? Yes. I don't care anymore if he changes his mind. I'm not becoming a doctor to prove anything to him. I'm becoming a doctor because people need someone who cares about fixing their hearts. And I care, Mama. I care so much it hurts sometimes. Rebecca looked at her daughter, now 16 and already possessing more wisdom and compassion than many adults. Then we'll find a way, baby girl. We'll find a way. At Grace's high school graduation, she was valedictorian. Northwestern University had offered her a full academic scholarship for undergraduate studies, with guaranteed admission to their medical school program upon completion of her bachelor's degree. Standing at the podium, Grace looked out at the audience of families and students. Rebecca sat in the front row, tears of pride streaming down her face. Elena sat beside her, equally emotional. My fellow graduates, Grace began. We're here today not because someone decided we were worthy, but because we decided we were worthy. We proved our worth through our choices, our efforts, our determination to become better than the circumstances we started with. She paused, looking directly at her mother. Some of us had people who believed in us from the beginning. Some of us had to learn to believe in ourselves. Either way, we're here because we chose to be here. And that choice, that determination, will carry us forward into whatever futures we create. After the ceremony, Grace hugged Rebecca tightly. Mama, I'm going to make you proud. Baby girl, you've been making me proud since the day you were born. And someday, even your father will understand what he threw away." Grace smiled, but her expression held a maturity that hadn't been there even a year before. "I hope he does, Mama. Not for my sake, but for his. Because the day might come when he needs someone to save his life. And I want to be the kind of person who would save it, even after everything he did to us." Rebecca looked at her daughter with wonder and a little fear. At 18, Grace had already learned to transform pain into purpose, rejection into resolve, and abandonment into the determination to never abandon others. She was becoming exactly the kind of person who could hold someone's life in her hands and make the choice to save it, regardless of their past. What Rebecca didn't know was that in exactly 9 years, Grace would face that precise choice when Alexander Sterling's heart would fail and his life would depend entirely on the daughter he had called useless. Northwestern University Medical School welcomed its newest class on a crisp September morning. Among the 200 incoming students, Grace Martinez stood out not for her youth, though at 18 she was among the youngest, but for the quiet intensity with which she approached every lesson, every procedure, every patient interaction. Dr. Patricia Chun, the anatomy professor, noticed it during the first week of cadaver lab. While other students struggled with the emotional weight of their first human dissection, Grace approached the cardiac examination with reverence and precision. "Miss Martinez, you're isolating the coronary arteries with remarkable skill. Have you done this before?" "No, Dr. Chun, but I've been studying cardiac anatomy since I was 8 years old." Dr. Chin watched Grace carefully trace the path of the left anterior descending artery. "Why cardiac specifically?" Grace paused her dissection. "Because the heart is the most honest organ. It either works or it doesn't. There's no pretending, no politics, no judgment. Just function and life." By her second year, Grace was working in Dr. Williams' clinic 3 evenings a week while maintaining her perfect academic record. The other medical students struggled to balance coursework with basic survival. Grace balanced coursework with patient care, research projects, and sending money home to Rebecca. "Grace, you're pushing yourself too hard," her study partner Marcus warned. "You haven't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks." "Marcus, do you know what my mother was doing when she was my age? Working 3 jobs to keep us alive. I can handle medical school and a part-time clinic." "But why? You already have the best grades in our class." Grace looked up from her pharmacology textbook. "Because every patient I help now is practice for the patients I'll save later. And because there are people who need medical care who can't afford to wait for me to graduate." Dr. Williams had observed Grace's evolution over 2 years of evening work. She had progressed from basic patient assistance to conducting preliminary examinations under his supervision. Her diagnostic instincts were becoming legendary among the clinic staff. "Grace, I had a 70-year-old man come in yesterday with chest pain. What would you look for?" Without hesitation, Grace rattled off the examination protocol. EKG first, check for ST elevation or depression. Blood pressure, both arms. Listen for heart murmurs, especially aortic stenosis in elderly patients. Examine ankles for edema indicating possible heart failure. Ask about radiation of pain, associated symptoms, family history. And if his EKG shows subtle abnormalities, but he insists he feels fine, trust the EKG over the patient's perception. Elderly patients often have atypical presentations. I'd recommend immediate cardiology referral and stress testing. Dr. Williams smiled. "You just described exactly what I did. And you're 20 years old." Grace's reputation was spreading beyond the clinic. During her third-year clinical rotations, she requested assignment to the Cardiac Surgery Observation Program at Chicago General Hospital. The program typically accepted only fourth-year students, but Grace's academic record and clinic experience earned her an exception. Dr. Michael Peterson, head of cardiac surgery, was skeptical about the young observer. "Miss Martinez, cardiac surgery observation isn't a casual elective. You'll be standing for 12-hour procedures. You'll see things that even experienced nurses find disturbing." "Dr. Peterson, I've been preparing for this since I was 8 years old. I understand the commitment." Her first observation was a complex valve replacement on a 55-year-old construction worker. Grace arrived at 5 in the morning, scrubbed in by 6, and remained focused and alert throughout the 8-hour procedure. When the surgery concluded successfully, Dr. Peterson found Grace reviewing the surgical notes with intense concentration. Most observers are exhausted after their first long procedure. You look energized. I am energized, Dr. Peterson. That man's family was in the waiting room for 8 hours, terrified they might lose him. Now they won't. What could be more energizing than that? Over the following months, Grace observed every cardiac procedure she could access. Bypass surgeries, valve repairs, emergency interventions. She took detailed notes, asked precise questions, and began developing her own theories about surgical technique improvements. Dr. Peterson called her into his office after she had completed 6 months of observations. Grace, I've been doing cardiac surgery for 22 years. I've trained dozens of residents. I've never seen anyone with your combination of technical understanding and emotional intelligence. Thank you, Dr. Peterson. I'm not finished. Chicago General is expanding our cardiac program. We're looking for exceptional candidates for our residency program. I want you to apply here when you graduate. Grace felt her pulse quicken. Chicago General has the most competitive cardiac residency in the Midwest, which is why I want you here. Grace, in 30 years of medicine, I've met perhaps 5 surgeons who had what I call the gift. The ability to save patients that others would lose. You have it. That evening, Grace called Rebecca with the news. Mama, Dr. Peterson thinks I should apply for cardiac surgery residency at Chicago General. That's wonderful, Mija. But isn't that the same hospital where Alexander's company tests their devices? Grace was quiet for a moment. Yes, Mama. Chicago General uses Sterling medical devices in most of their cardiac procedures. How do you feel about that? Honestly, it feels like destiny. I'll be saving lives using the devices his company creates, but I'll be doing it with skills he said were impossible for a woman to develop. Rebecca's voice carried a note of concern. Grace, make sure you're choosing Chicago General for the right reasons. Not to prove something, but because it's the best place for your career. It is the best, Mama. Dr. Peterson is one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country. The program trains surgeons who go on to head departments at major hospitals. It's exactly where I need to be. During her 4th year, Grace's research project focused on improving cardiac surgery outcomes in pediatric patients. She developed a modified technique for repairing complex heart defects in children, combining traditional surgical methods with innovative approaches she had observed during her clinic work. Dr. Chun, now her research supervisor, was impressed by Grace's findings. Grace, this technique could significantly reduce recovery time for children with congenital heart defects. You should present this at the National Medical Student Research Conference. The conference was held in Boston. Grace's presentation drew an audience of senior cardiologists, medical school professors, and residency program directors. Her poise and expertise impressed everyone present. Dr. Sarah Mitchell from Johns Hopkins approached Grace after her presentation. Miss Martinez, that was exceptional work. Johns Hopkins would very much like you to consider our cardiac surgery residency program. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I'm honored. But I've committed to applying at Chicago General. May I ask why? Johns Hopkins has equally prestigious programs. Grace considered her answer carefully. Chicago General serves a diverse patient population with complex needs. The volume of emergency cardiac procedures there will provide the most comprehensive training possible. I want to be prepared for any scenario. What Grace didn't mention was her growing awareness that Chicago General treated many of the city's most prominent business leaders, including, she suspected, executives from Sterling Medical Technologies. Medical school graduation arrived with multiple honors for Grace. Summa cum laude, recipient of the Outstanding Student in Clinical Medicine Award, and acceptance to Chicago General's cardiac surgery residency program. Rebecca and Elena sat in the front row, overwhelmed with pride. Dr. Peterson approached them after the ceremony. Mrs. Martinez, I wanted to tell you personally that your daughter is the most promising cardiac surgery resident we've ever accepted. She's going to save countless lives. Rebecca smiled through her tears. Dr. Peterson, she's been saving lives since she was 16. Now she'll just have better tools to do it with. That evening, Grace sat with Rebecca and Elena in their small apartment, her medical degree displayed prominently on the kitchen table. Mama, I start residency at Chicago General in 3 weeks. 5 years from now, I'll be a fully qualified cardiac surgeon. And then what, Mija? Grace looked thoughtful. Then I'll be exactly what I've always wanted to be. Someone who can fix what's broken. Someone who never gives up on a patient, no matter how difficult the case. Elena reached across the table to squeeze Grace's hand. Your father has no idea what he lost, Grace. Abuela, I hope someday he does understand. Not because I need his approval, but because understanding might help him become a better person. Rebecca marveled at her daughter's capacity for forgiveness even after everything they had endured. Grace, what if you encounter him in your professional life? Chicago is a smaller medical community than you might think. If I encounter him, I'll treat him the same way I'd treat any patient or colleague. With professionalism and respect. My personal feelings don't belong in medical settings. 3 weeks later, Grace Martinez began her residency at Chicago General Hospital. She was assigned to the cardiac surgery unit, working directly under Dr. Peterson's supervision. Her shifts were 18 hours long, her responsibilities immense, her learning curve steep. But Grace thrived in the high-pressure environment. Her diagnostic skills, honed through years of clinic work, served her well. Her surgical technique, developed through countless hours of observation and practice, impressed even the most senior attending physicians. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, the chief resident, pulled Grace aside after her first month. Grace, I've been watching your work. You have instincts that most residents don't develop until their 3rd year. Where did you learn to read patients so accurately? I learned that every patient is someone's most important person. When you remember that, you pay attention differently. By her 2nd year of residency, Grace was assisting with the most complex procedures. Her reputation for staying calm under pressure and finding solutions when others saw only problems made her the resident that attending physicians requested specifically. The defining moment came during her 3rd year. A 6-year-old girl named Maria was brought to the emergency room with a complex heart defect that required immediate surgery. The case was so complicated that 3 attending physicians consulted on the approach. Grace studied the imaging scans and spoke quietly to Dr. Peterson. Doctor, what if we modified the technique I developed in medical school? The pediatric approach I presented at the research conference. Dr. Peterson considered the suggestion. Grace, that's still experimental. This child's life is on the line. Doctor, traditional approaches have a 60% success rate for this type of defect. My modified technique showed 85% success in simulation models. You're asking me to trust an experimental technique developed by a resident. Grace met his eyes steadily. I'm asking you to trust the technique that gives Maria the best chance to live. Dr. Peterson made the decision to proceed with Grace's approach. The surgery took 7 hours. Grace assisted throughout, her steady hands and innovative modifications proving crucial to the procedure's success. When Maria's heart began beating normally in her chest, the entire surgical team erupted in quiet celebration. Dr. Peterson turned to Grace with undisguised admiration. Grace, you just saved that little girl's life with a technique you developed as a medical student. That's not normal. That's exceptional. News of the successful experimental procedure spread throughout Chicago General. By her 4th year of residency, Grace was being consulted on the most challenging cases. Department heads from other hospitals were taking notice of the young resident who seemed to succeed where others failed. During her 5th and final year of residency, Grace was offered the position of chief resident. The role would mean overseeing all surgical residents, managing schedules, and serving as the primary liaison between residents and attending physicians. Grace, Dr. Peterson explained, chief resident is typically offered to someone planning to join our permanent staff after residency. Are you interested in staying at Chicago General? Grace considered the offer carefully. Dr. Peterson, what would that position entail in terms of patient care? You'd maintain a full surgical schedule while also handling administrative responsibilities. You'd be working with our most complex cases and training the next generation of cardiac surgeons. And I'd be working with patients from throughout the Chicago area? Yes. Chicago General serves everyone from uninsured patients to CEOs of major corporations. You'd see the full spectrum of cardiac conditions and patient backgrounds. Grace accepted the position, knowing that it positioned her to eventually become head of the cardiac surgery department. She also knew that it made it increasingly likely she would eventually encounter patients connected to sterling medical technologies. What she couldn't have predicted was that within 18 months, She would receive an emergency call about a VIP patient experiencing massive cardiac failure. A patient whose life would depend entirely on the surgical skills of the daughter he had abandoned 27 years earlier. Sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones we choose, but the ones that choose us. Dr. Grace Martinez was reviewing surgical schedules in her office when her hands began trembling, not from fatigue or caffeine, but from the patient file glowing on her computer screen. Alexander Sterling, age 65, CEO, Sterling Medical Technologies. Massive myocardial infarction. ETA, 12 minutes. She stared at the name until the letters seemed to blur together. 27 years of preparation, and she still wasn't ready for this moment. Her phone buzzed. Rebecca's weekly check-in call. Mama, Grace's voice cracked slightly. I need to tell you something. Mija, what's wrong? You sound shaken. They're bringing Alexander Sterling to my emergency room. He's had a massive heart attack. The silence stretched between Chicago General and Rebecca's apartment across the city. Finally, Rebecca spoke, her voice steady. What are you going to do? I don't know. I could transfer the case to Dr. Peterson. He's equally qualified. No one would question it. Grace, I raised you to make your own decisions. What does your heart tell you? Grace closed her eyes. My heart tells me I took an oath to save lives. But my heart also tells me he's the one person who deserves nothing from me. And what does your training tell you? That I'm the best cardiac surgeon available right now. That his chance of survival drops significantly with any delay. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Mija, 27 years ago, I held you in that hospital room and promised you'd prove him wrong. Today, you get to choose how. The emergency coordinator's voice echoed through the hallway. Dr. Martinez, Sterling Medical VIP patient, 2 minutes out. Grace hung up and walked toward the emergency bay, her mind racing through a decision tree she'd never imagined facing. In the elevator, she caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. Same determined eyes Alexander had dismissed as worthless. Same strong jawline he'd seen as inadequate. Same hands he'd declared incapable of importance. The ambulance doors burst open. Alexander Sterling lay unconscious on the gurney, his face gray, monitors beeping frantically. Behind the ambulance, a black sedan disgorged 3 passengers. A woman in her 50s with perfectly styled auburn hair, clearly his wife. 2 younger women, mid-20s, both with the composed expressions of people accustomed to crisis. Grace stepped forward, her professional instincts overriding every personal emotion. I'm Dr. Martinez, head of cardiac surgery. What's his status? Massive anterior wall MI, the paramedic reported. Lost consciousness 12 minutes ago. We've got him stabilized, but his pressure's dropping. Grace began her examination, her hands steady despite the emotional earthquake happening inside her chest. She placed the stethoscope on Alexander's chest and heard the irregular rhythm that confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't just a heart attack. His heart was failing rapidly. Get him 2 or 1, she commanded. Call for 2 units of O-negative. Have cardiothoracic perfusion standing by. The woman Grace assumed was Alexander's wife approached, her voice tight with controlled panic. Doctor, I'm Catherine Sterling. How bad is it? Grace looked at Catherine, seeing genuine fear and love in her eyes. Whatever Alexander had become as a husband to this woman, she clearly cared deeply about him. Mrs. Sterling, your husband has suffered extensive damage to his heart muscle. We need to operate immediately. Are you the best surgeon available? Grace paused. The honest answer was yes. The complicated answer would take 27 years to explain. I'm the surgeon who's going to save his life. One of the young women stepped forward. Dr. Martinez, I'm Emma Sterling. This is my sister Lily. Is there anything you need to know about his medical history? Grace studied Emma's face, seeing intelligence and genuine concern. These were Alexander's adopted daughters, the ones he'd chosen to replace the biological daughter he'd discarded. Any previous cardiac issues? He's been having chest pains for months, but refused to see a doctor, Lily replied. Said he was too busy to deal with medical appointments. Ironic for a man whose company makes medical devices. Grace felt a bitter smile threaten to surface. Mrs. Sterling, I need you to understand something. Your husband's condition is critical. Even with immediate surgery, his chances are approximately 65%. Catherine's composure finally cracked. 65%? But you're Chicago General. You're supposed to be the best. We are the best. which is why I'm being honest with you about the severity of his condition. Grace turned toward the operating room, then stopped. Mrs. Sterling, before we proceed, I need to ask, does your husband have any family members who should be contacted? Any children from previous relationships? Catherine's expression shifted slightly. Why would you ask that? Standard protocol for high-risk procedures. Emma and Lily exchanged glances. Emma spoke carefully. Doctor, our father has mentioned having another daughter from his first marriage, but we don't know how to reach her. Grace felt the irony settle like a weight in her chest. I see. We'll proceed with the surgery. You should prepare yourselves for a long wait. In the scrub room, Grace methodically washed her hands, each motion automatic after years of repetition. But her mind was anything but automatic. She was about to operate on the man who had looked at her newborn face and declared her worthless. The man whose rejection had shaped every major decision of her life. The man who was about to owe his life to the daughter he'd thrown away. Dr. Peterson appeared beside her. Grace, I heard about the VIP patient. Sterling Medical Technologies CEO. Are you comfortable handling this alone? Grace continued scrubbing. Why wouldn't I be? High-profile cases come with additional pressure. Media attention, board scrutiny. If anything goes wrong. Dr. Peterson, are you questioning my surgical capabilities? Not at all. I'm questioning whether you want this level of visibility on your permanent record. Grace looked at her mentor through the observation window into, or, one, where Alexander lay surrounded by monitors and machines. Many of those machines bore the Sterling Medical Technologies logo. The devices designed by his company were about to be used to save his life, operated by the hands of the daughter he'd declared incapable of significance. I want this case, she said firmly. Why? Grace considered her answer carefully. Because he deserves the best surgeon available. And today, that's me. She entered the operating room to find her surgical team preparing the patient. Alexander looked smaller on the operating table, vulnerable in a way that 27 years of anger hadn't prepared her to see. His graying hair was disheveled, his powerful businessman's presence reduced to human fragility. Patient status? Grace asked, slipping into her professional focus. Prepped and ready, Dr. Martinez. Anesthesia stable. Grace picked up the scalpel, her hand steady. For a moment, she allowed herself to really look at Alexander's face. She could see herself in his features. The stubborn set of his jaw that had served her well in medical school. The high cheekbones that had made her recognizable even as a child. The broad forehead that housed the intelligence he'd been too prejudiced to recognize in his daughter. Dr. Martinez? The surgical nurse was waiting for her first incision. Grace positioned the scalpel above Alexander's chest. One cut would begin the procedure that would save his life. Or she could hesitate, let complications arise naturally, and no one would question the loss of a patient who arrived in such critical condition. For just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine it. Alexander Sterling dies on the operating table. The man who'd abandoned his family finally faces the ultimate consequence of his choices. The company that manufactures heart-saving devices loses its founder to heart failure. The poetic justice would be undeniable. But then Grace heard Rebecca's voice in her memory. You're going to show the world that worth isn't determined by what someone else wants you to be, but by what you choose to become. What did Grace choose to become? Someone who saved lives, or someone who chose which lives deserved saving? She made her first incision. Beginning median sternotomy, she announced, her voice steady and professional. For the next 4 hours, Grace Martinez performed the surgery of her life. Alexander's heart damage was more extensive than the initial scans had revealed. 2 major arteries were completely blocked, and a third showed severe narrowing. Under normal circumstances, this level of damage would be considered inoperable. Dr. Martinez, her surgical assistant, said quietly, the damage to the LAD is worse than expected. Are you sure we should continue? Grace studied the exposed heart, seeing damage that would challenge even the most experienced surgeons. This was the moment when she could legitimately call the surgery unsuccessful due to the extent of damage discovered during the procedure. Instead, she reached for a different instrument. Prep for triple bypass with innovative graft placement. We're going to try something that hasn't been done before. Doctor, that's experimental. It's innovative. There's a difference. Grace began implementing a surgical technique she'd been developing in her research. A combination of traditional bypass surgery with her own modifications for severely damaged cardiac tissue. It was risky and proven, and exactly the kind of medical innovation that Sterling Medical Technologies claimed to support. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was saving Alexander's life using techniques that proved everything he'd said about women in medicine was wrong. 3 hours into the surgery, Alexander's blood pressure began dropping dangerously. "He's going into cardiogenic shock," the anesthesiologist warned. "Increase pressure support," Grace commanded, never pausing in her delicate work. "We're not losing him now." She completed the final graft with microscopic precision, then stepped back to assess her work. Alexander's heart, supported by Sterling medical devices and repaired by techniques he'd never imagined possible, began beating with steady, strong rhythm. "Dr. Martinez," her assistant said with quiet amazement, "that was extraordinary. You just saved a patient that most surgeons would have declared inoperable." Grace looked down at Alexander's face, peaceful under anesthesia. "He's not saved yet. Recovery will be critical." But privately, she knew he would recover. She had given him not just a functional heart, but a better heart than he'd had in years. The daughter he'd called worthless had just performed a medical miracle to preserve his life. As they wheeled Alexander to recovery, Grace finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. She had faced the ultimate test of character and chosen to save the life of the man who had destroyed her family. Not because he deserved it, but because she had chosen to be someone who saves lives regardless of personal history. Catherine Sterling rushed toward her as she emerged from the operating room. "Dr. Martinez, how is he?" "The surgery was successful. Your husband is stable and should make a full recovery." Catherine began crying with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much. How can we ever repay you?" Grace looked at this woman who had built a life with Alexander, who had raised daughters he'd chosen to replace the one he'd rejected. "Take care of him, Mrs. Sterling. Make sure he follows his cardiac rehabilitation program. And maybe help him understand that the people we dismiss might be the ones who end up saving us." Catherine looked puzzled by the philosophical comment, but nodded gratefully. As Grace walked toward her office, she realized something fundamental had shifted inside her. For 27 years, Alexander Sterling had been the villain of her story. Today, he was simply a patient she had saved. Tomorrow, he would wake up owing his life to the daughter he had thrown away, and she would have to decide what that meant for both of them. The hardest battles aren't always against external enemies, but against the parts of ourselves that want to become what others made us believe we were. Alexander Sterling's eyes opened to the sterile white ceiling of Chicago General's cardiac recovery unit. Monitors beeped steadily around him, and the familiar ache in his chest told him he was alive, though he couldn't immediately remember why that surprised him. "You're awake." The voice was calm, professional, female. He turned his head slowly and saw her. Mid-20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing surgical scrubs with a stethoscope around her neck. She was checking his monitors with practiced efficiency, but there was something about her profile that made his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with his recent surgery. "I'm Dr. Martinez. I performed your cardiac surgery yesterday." Alexander tried to focus on her face as she turned toward him, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligent dark eyes that seemed to look right through him, the high cheekbones that were unmistakably familiar. His voice came out as a whisper. "Martinez, yes. You had a massive myocardial infarction. Triple bypass surgery with innovative graft techniques. You're going to make a full recovery." But Alexander wasn't listening to her medical explanation. He was staring at her face, seeing Rebecca's eyes and his own stubborn chin, seeing the ghost of a newborn baby he had walked away from 27 years ago. "You have Rebecca's eyes." The words escaped before he could stop them. Grace's hand stilled on his chart. "Excuse me. And my chin. And that expression you get when you're concentrating." His voice grew stronger as the recognition hit him like a second heart attack. "Grace. Grace Martinez. You're my daughter." Grace set down the chart and looked at him directly for the first time. "I'm your surgeon, Mr. Sterling. I repaired the damage to your heart using advanced cardiac techniques. You're Grace. My daughter. The baby I..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "The baby you threw away because she wasn't the son you ordered?" Grace's voice remained professionally calm, but Alexander could hear the steel underneath. "Yes, that would be me." Alexander struggled to sit up, his mind reeling from the impossibility of the situation. How is this possible? How did you become a doctor? How did you end up here? I became a doctor the same way anyone becomes a doctor. Medical school, residency, years of training. I ended up here because I'm good at what I do. But how did you afford medical school? How did Rebecca manage? Grace moved to the window, her back to him. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us alive. I earned scholarships because I was determined to prove that your assessment of my worth was wrong. Alexander felt something breaking inside his chest that had nothing to do with his recent surgery. Grace, I need you to understand something about that day. I was under enormous pressure from the board, from investors. I had plans that required a son. Grace turned back to face him, and Alexander saw no anger in her expression, which somehow made it worse. I know exactly what you required, Mr. Sterling. You required something I could never be. So I became something better. Better. I save lives, Mr. Sterling. I repair what's broken instead of breaking what could be healed. Alexander stared at his daughter, trying to reconcile the accomplished surgeon standing before him with the pink bundle he had dismissed as useless. You became a cardiac surgeon. I did. You fix hearts. I fix hearts. The irony was so profound it took his breath away. And you saved my life. Grace nodded once. I saved your life using the very skills you said were impossible for a woman to develop. Using techniques that proved everything you believed about female capabilities in medicine was wrong. Using devices manufactured by your own company. Alexander closed his eyes, the full weight of what had happened settling over him like a physical force. I don't understand how you could do it. After what I did to you and Rebecca, how could you choose to save my life? Because that's who I chose to become. Grace's voice softened slightly. I took an oath to save lives. All lives. Even the life of someone who once told me I had no value. Grace, I was wrong. I was so completely, devastatingly wrong. Yes, you were. The simple acknowledgement hit harder than any accusation could have. Alexander looked at his daughter, seeing the strength and compassion that had saved his life despite everything he had done to destroy her chances of success. How do I apologize for something like that? How do I make amends for throwing away the best thing I ever created? Grace was quiet for a long moment. You don't, Mr. Sterling. You can't give back the years you stole from us. You can't undo the damage you did to my mother. You can't erase the nights she cried wondering what was wrong with her that her husband could reject their perfect baby. Alexander felt tears he hadn't shed in decades beginning to form. Then what do? You get better. You follow your cardiac rehabilitation program. You go home to the family you chose to keep, and you try to be better than you were. And us? What happens with us? Grace picked up his chart again, returning to her professional demeanor. There is no us, Mr. Sterling. I'm your doctor until you're discharged. After that, you're simply someone whose life I saved. Catherine appeared in the doorway, followed by Emma and Lily. Alexander watched as Grace's expression shifted into practiced politeness. Mrs. Sterling, your husband is recovering well. The surgery was completely successful. Catherine approached the bed, relief evident on her face. Alexander, thank God you're all right. Dr. Martinez said you nearly died. I did die, Catherine, and she brought me back. Alexander looked at Grace with wonder and gratitude that felt entirely inadequate. She gave me a second chance I don't deserve. Emma stepped forward. Dr. Martinez, we can't thank you enough. Our father means everything to us. Grace looked at Emma and Lily, seeing the genuine love they had for Alexander, the kind of father-daughter relationship she had never been allowed to experience. He's lucky to have daughters who care about him so deeply. Doctor, Lily said quietly, before the surgery, you asked if Dad had any other family members. You specifically asked about children from previous relationships. Grace's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the chart. Standard protocol for high-risk surgeries. Emma and Lily exchanged glances. Emma spoke carefully. It's just that we've always wondered about our half-sister. Dad mentioned having another daughter, but we've never met her. Alexander felt his heart rate monitor begin beeping faster. Catherine looked confused. Alexander, what are they talking about? Catherine, there's something I need to tell you. All of you. Alexander's voice was steady despite the emotional earthquake happening inside him. Dr. Martinez isn't just my surgeon. She's my daughter from my first marriage to Rebecca. The silence in the room was absolute. Catherine's face went white. Emma and Lily stared at Grace with dawning recognition. "Dr. Martinez," Emma whispered. "You're our sister?" Grace looked at these young women who had grown up with the father she had been denied, who had received the love and support she had only dreamed of. "Biologically, yes. But you have the father you need. I have the life I built." Lily stepped forward impulsively. "But we've wanted to know you our whole lives. Dad always seemed sad when he mentioned you. We thought you might want to know us too." Grace felt something crack in the protective wall she had built around her heart. These weren't the enemies she had imagined. They were simply young women who had grown up wondering about their missing sister. "I'm sure you're both wonderful people," Grace said gently. "But this situation is complicated in ways that go beyond today's surgery." Catherine finally found her voice. "Dr. Martinez, I had no idea. Alexander never told me the full story about his first marriage." "There isn't much story to tell, Mrs. Sterling. Your husband wanted a son. He got a daughter. He made his choice." Alexander struggled to sit up further. "Grace, please. Let me explain to them what happened. Let me tell them the truth about what I did." "The truth?" Grace looked at him with something that might have been pity. "The truth is that you looked at your newborn daughter and decided she was worthless because she wasn't male. The truth is that you abandoned a woman who had just given birth to your child. The truth is that you chose to build a new family rather than love the one you had." Emma and Lily looked stricken. Catherine put her hand to her mouth. Grace continued, her voice steady but not cruel. "But the truth is also that your father built a company that creates devices that save lives. The truth is that he gave you both opportunities and love that helped you become accomplished young women. The truth is that people can be capable of both terrible and wonderful things." She moved toward the door. "I'll check on your progress this evening, Mr. Sterling. Follow the post-surgical instructions exactly. Your heart has been repaired, but full recovery depends on your choices going forward." Alexander called after her. "Grace, wait. Please." She paused at the threshold. "Yes. I know I have no right to ask this, but could we talk sometime? Just you and me." Grace considered the request. "Why?" "Because I want to know who you became. Because I want to understand what I lost. Because I want to try to become worthy of the second chance you gave me." Grace looked back at the family gathered around Alexander's bed. Catherine holding his hand. Emma and Lily looking at her with curiosity and hope. A man who had built an empire and raised daughters and created life-saving technology, but who had also made the cruelest choice possible 27 years ago. "I'll think about it," she said finally. As Grace walked down the hospital corridor, she felt the shift that had begun during Alexander's surgery completing itself. For 27 years, she had been the daughter who was rejected. Today, she became the woman who had saved a life that didn't deserve saving, and in doing so, had saved herself from becoming the bitter person that rejection could have created. Behind her, in the recovery room, Alexander Sterling was learning what it felt like to be given grace by the person you least deserved it from. And for the first time in 27 years, he was beginning to understand what he had thrown away. The most powerful transformations happen not when we get what we deserve, but when we give what others need despite what they've done to us. 18 months after saving Alexander Sterling's life, Grace Martinez stood in the auditorium of the American College of Cardiology, preparing to deliver the keynote address on innovative cardiac surgical techniques. In the audience sat Dr. Peterson, Rebecca, and unexpectedly, Alexander Sterling. He had requested the meeting 6 months after his recovery. Not in the hospital, but in a neutral coffee shop near Northwestern University. Grace had agreed, curious despite herself about what the man who had abandoned her might have become. That first conversation had been stilted, formal. Alexander had asked about her childhood, her education, her career. Grace had answered with clinical precision, offering facts without emotions. But something in his questions suggested genuine interest rather than mere guilt. "I've been following your research," he had said during that coffee meeting. "The pediatric cardiac techniques you've developed. They're being implemented in hospitals across the country. Children with complex heart defects deserve the best possible outcomes," Grace had replied. "Like the little girl you saved during residency. Maria." Grace had looked up, surprised. "How do you know about Maria?" "I make it my business to know about breakthrough surgeries performed using Sterling medical devices. Your technique saved her life and has since saved 43 other children." Grace had studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motive. Instead, she saw something she hadn't expected, Pride. Not possessive or claiming pride, but the kind of pride a colleague might feel for another's achievement. Now, 18 months later, their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Not father and daughter in any traditional sense, but something more complex. Professional respect. Cautious friendship. Acknowledgement of shared purpose despite their painful history. Alexander had undergone his own transformation. The heart attack had forced him to confront his mortality, but meeting Grace had forced him to confront his character. He had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Sterling Medical Technologies, appointing Emma as CEO while he focused on philanthropy. The Sterling Foundation for Women in Medicine now provided scholarships specifically for daughters of single mothers pursuing cardiac surgery. Alexander never mentioned the personal inspiration for the program, but Grace understood the gesture. More surprisingly, Rebecca had agreed to meet with Alexander after months of Grace sharing details about his gradual change. Their first meeting had been awkward, weighted with 27 years of accumulated hurt. But Rebecca's strength had always been her ability to see people clearly, and she began to see genuine remorse in the man who had once destroyed her faith and love. "I won't pretend to forgive everything," Rebecca had told Grace after their third meeting with Alexander. "But I can see that he's trying to become better than he was, and I'm curious about who he might become." Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully. Coffee meetings became dinner conversations. Alexander learned about Rebecca's work with single mothers, her advocacy for women leaving difficult situations, her quiet strength that had built something beautiful from the ashes of abandonment. Rebecca learned about the pressure Alexander had felt from his own father, the expectations that had warped his understanding of worth and legacy, the emptiness he had felt despite his professional success. Understanding didn't excuse his actions, but it provided context for the choices that had hurt them all. Standing at the podium now, Grace looked out at the audience of cardiac surgeons, researchers, and medical students. "Today I want to talk about healing what can be healed," she began. "In cardiac surgery, we learn quickly that not every heart can be saved. But the hearts we can save deserve our absolute best effort, regardless of how that heart came to need healing." She clicked to her first slide, showing Maria's pre- and post-surgical imaging. "This little girl came to us with a complex congenital defect that most surgeons considered inoperable. Traditional approaches gave her a 30% chance of survival." Alexander leaned forward slightly, remembering the conversation they'd had about this case during one of their coffee meetings. "But when we encounter a heart that seems beyond repair, we have a choice. We can declare it hopeless, or we can innovate. We can find new ways to approach old problems." Grace's presentation detailed the surgical technique she had developed, the combination of traditional methods with innovative approaches that had saved Maria and dozens of other children since. "The most important lesson I've learned," Grace continued, "is that healing is rarely about returning to what was before. True healing creates something new, something stronger than what existed previously." After her presentation, Grace was surrounded by colleagues congratulating her on the research, the techniques, the lives saved. Through the crowd, she saw Alexander waiting patiently, not presuming to interrupt her professional moment. When the crowd thinned, he approached. "That was remarkable, Grace. The technique you described for pediatric valve repair. That's going to revolutionize treatment for children with complex defects. It's still evolving. We're learning more with each case." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "I wanted to tell you something. Sterling Medical Technologies is partnering with Children's Hospital of Philadelphia to fund a research center dedicated to pediatric cardiac innovation. We'd like to name it the Grace Martinez Center for Pediatric Cardiac Research." Grace stared at him. "Alexander, I can't accept that. It's not a gift. It's recognition of what you've already accomplished. Your research deserves proper funding and resources. But using my name." "Grace, for 27 years, I told myself that having a daughter was a business liability. I convinced myself that Sterling Medical Technologies needed male leadership to succeed. Emma has been CEO for a year and has increased our market share by 30% while improving our workplace culture and expanding our research into innovative treatments." Grace was quiet, processing his words. "The research center isn't about our relationship," Alexander continued. "It's about ensuring that children with broken hearts have access to the best possible surgical techniques. It's about supporting the kind of medical innovation that saves lives." That evening, Grace, Rebecca, Alexander, Catherine, Emma, and Lily gathered for dinner at a quiet restaurant. It had become a monthly tradition, these family meals that no one quite knew how to define. Grace, tell them about the research center, Alexander said as they reviewed menus. Dad wants to fund a pediatric cardiac research center and name it after me, Grace explained. Emma looked up from her menu. That's amazing. The board will be thrilled. We've been looking for ways to expand our research partnerships. I don't know if I'm comfortable with the recognition aspect, Grace said. Lily leaned forward. Grace, can I tell you something? When Emma and I were growing up, Dad used to get this sad look sometimes. We'd ask what was wrong, and he'd say he had another daughter somewhere who he'd made a terrible mistake about. We used to imagine what you might be like. We imagined you were probably incredible, Emma added. We were right. Catherine spoke quietly. Grace, I hope you know that discovering your existence didn't threaten me or make me angry. It made me understand Alexander better. It explained the sadness he carried and his determination to be better for Emma and Lily. Grace looked around the table at these people who had become, through the strangest circumstances, something like family. Not the family she had originally been denied, but a new configuration built on choice and mutual respect rather than biology and obligation. The research center isn't about our history, she said finally. It's about the future. About children who need someone to believe their hearts can be healed. Alexander smiled, the first completely genuine smile she had ever seen from him. Exactly. Rebecca reached across the table to squeeze Grace's hand. You were right when you told me that you repair what's broken instead of breaking what could be healed. Look what you've repaired here. 6 months later, the Grace Martinez Center for Pediatric Cardiac Research opened at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The dedication ceremony brought together cardiac surgeons from across the country, families of children who had benefited from Grace's techniques, and the unusual family that had formed around the intersection of professional excellence and personal healing. Grace stood before the assembled crowd, looking at the building that would house the next generation of research into saving children's hearts. In the audience, she saw Rebecca, who had taught her that worth comes from within. Alexander, who had learned that worth isn't determined by gender or biology, but by character and contribution. Emma and Lily, who had welcomed a sister they'd never expected to find. Catherine, who had shown grace in accepting a complicated family situation. This center represents something I learned as a surgeon, Grace said. Sometimes the most damaged hearts are the ones that, once healed, become the strongest. Sometimes what seems like an ending is actually a beginning. Alexander watched his daughter speak, understanding finally what he had thrown away and what had grown from that loss. He couldn't change his original choice, but he could choose every day to support the remarkable woman his daughter had become despite his failures. After the ceremony, Grace found herself walking with Alexander through the hospital corridors where she had trained, where she had learned to save lives despite the circumstances of her own birth. Alexander, she said, using his first name for the first time in their renewed relationship. I need you to understand something. I didn't save your life to rebuild our relationship. I saved it because that's who I chose to become. I know. And this research center, our monthly dinners, the family dynamic we've created. None of it erases what happened 27 years ago. I know that too. But it does prove that people can choose to become better than their worst moments. Alexander stopped walking and looked at his daughter. Grace, I know I can never be the father you needed 27 years ago. But could I possibly be the father you might choose to know now? Grace considered the question, looking at this man who had made the cruelest choice of her childhood, but who was genuinely trying to make better choices every day since. You already are, she said simply. As they walked through the hospital corridors lined with sterling medical devices that would help doctors save lives, Grace realized that the most profound healing isn't about returning to what was broken, but about creating something entirely new from the pieces of what remains. The measure of our lives isn't determined by the mistakes we make, but by what we choose to build from the wreckage of those mistakes. If Grace's journey from rejected newborn to life-saving surgeon inspired you, hit that like button right now. Her story proves that the people who underestimate us don't get to define our worth or limit our potential. Subscribe to Love Stories with Mr. Wilson and ring that notification bell, because stories like this remind us that our greatest victories often come from our deepest wounds. Grace didn't just prove her father wrong. She proved that grace, literally and figuratively, is more powerful than grudges. Share this story with someone who's been told they're not enough because of who they are. Comment below and tell us about a time when you proved someone devastatingly wrong about your abilities. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, every rejection is a redirection towards something better. Grace's father thought he was discarding a useless daughter. Instead, he was creating the surgeon who would one day save his life and countless others. Until next time, keep choosing to become better than what others expected, and never forget that the best revenge is a life well lived.